Hey guys, what's up? Ross on. Mondays, huh? As Garfield would have said. Garfield wasn't funny. Let's lay the chips out on the fucking table right now. Garfield was not a funny comic. It's up there with Marmaduke or the Sunday Funnies. The shit was never funny. It's shit your dad laughed at. The funniest thing that ever actually came out of Garfield was Garfield Without Garfield, which mostly just features John having a psychological breakdown and talking to himself in his kitchen. Fantastic stuff. So, I was out for the weekend. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend that I had major things to do. I just spent the weekend getting drunk with my girlfriend. That's it. That's pretty much what I did for the whole weekend. And I need to kind of stop, but, you know, alcohol is just so delicious. And the weed in Ireland is garbage. I want to delve into the new report about children and video games affecting their grades. That came out today on BBC News, bbc.co.uk. And before I do that, this weekend I kept my finger on the pulse a good bit while I was out and about. And I noticed that sort of towards the weekend, Sargon of Akkad started getting the shit piled on. I was in a couple of hangouts where he was present and he was discussing some subjects with some guy named John Kelly. Now, John, if you see this video, you have profound autism. You significantly, I don't know how challenged you are in your daily life by your autistic tendencies, but you're clearly autistic. And arguing with you is like arguing with a Rubik's Cube that can talk. But as the weekend rolled on, Sargon just got fucking smashed over and over and over again. And I think the core point that he was being brought up on was that the video game he's working on, that he asked for money on Kickstarter, I think it was Kickstarter, is being significantly delayed. It's not being delivered on time. On one hand, I can kind of understand. He gave sufficient reasoning. Sargon sat down. He said, look, the project has been delayed because, quite frankly, the people involved are piecing out. I mean, if you lose a developer on a video game, especially a small team, the project gets delayed. The vision for the game is getting, reworked. What he wants to do with the game is being changed all the time. So, I mean, these are things that happen in the real video games industry with many more resources. And the indie game dev scene, the little things that wouldn't hurt big game developers really kick the shit out of smaller video games developers. And it continued on. The theme seemed to be this weekend calling people on, their apparent failures to deliver on products that they promised to give. I don't think Sargon has failed to deliver on the product. I think he's delayed the product. Given that Sargon juggles multiple projects, his main channel is his mainstay. That takes up a large amount of his work. Now, I can understand the idea that if Sargon is one of these people, and I don't know if I've ever seen Sargon do it directly, but if he's going to be one of these people who pulls up, Anita Sarkeesian on her failure to deliver on the Feminist Frequency Project, or at least her significant delay on delivering the Feminist Frequency Project, and then simultaneously be unable to do that himself, I can kind of understand people getting a little bit pissy with him over stuff like that. But at the same time, Anita Sarkeesian earns hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the point that was made with Sargon was that he earned a couple of grand, mostly from friends and family. They were his backers. There were people who probably, weren't going to be particularly interested in playing that game, etc. Continuing on the same grain, Brett Keane decided that he was going to talk shit about the Amazing Atheists' quote-unquote failures to deliver certain projects as well. But I think a lot of people need to keep in mind that investment can fail. this is, I don't see, I mean, I get big bankers don't seem to, get penalized when their investments fail, but investments can fail. This is the nature of an investment. An investment can fall flat on its face, it could fall on its arse. And if the project fails, that's a reality. The thing about investment is, you don't then go and ask for your money back if the project fails. Investing is a form of legalized financial gambling. You hope that your financial contributions to a project can help create the project and help keep the project moving. And at the end, ideally, you get a product. But if circumstances arise where the product can't be delivered, that's a fucking reality of investment, son. You gambled and you lost. Sometimes you gamble and you win. It's never nice, especially, if you're looking at, layman people on the ground putting, $50, a couple of $100 into a project and, not being able to deliver on it. And of course, I mean, I could touch on the Star Citizen thing, but I mean, I don't even think I need to. Star Citizen is in a similar situation. I think people who spend $15,000 on spaceships in Star Citizen, I don't want to say you fucking deserved it, son, but you fucking deserved it, son. So that's how I feel about that. Anyway, moving on. We have this report out today, and I'm just going to read the headline from the BBC News. Video game use linked to worse GCSEs, study suggests. Now, for all you Yankee Doodle Dandies out there, I can't believe I just said Yankee Doodle fucking Dandy. For our American friends, the GCSEs is kind of the final high school grade that one receives in the UK. There's a similar structure exists in Ireland and through most of the Western world. But the argument here is, and it's a very brief article. I mean, this is the thing about journalism these days. You can do 3 or 4 paragraphs, and apparently that's a news article now. But I'm going to read a couple of quick bullet points, and then I'm going to kind of agree with it, and then I'm going to kind of disagree with it. Children who play video games twice a day are less likely to achieve good GCSE grades, a study suggests. The National Children's Bureau of Northern Ireland research involved more than 600 14 to 16-year-olds from 2012 to 2014. It found that 41% of children who use portable gaming devices at least twice a day achieved at least 5 GCSE A to C grades, compared with 77% who used them less than once a week. So the research does not suggest why this might be a cause. It goes on to explain in some greater detail, but effectively the crux of the argument is the children between the ages of, I'm going to broaden it, I'm going to say 13 to like 17, who spend the majority of their free time playing video games, ultimately do less well in school compared to children who don't. I didn't see anything about gender in this. I think gender plays a factor in this. I think they've specifically excluded gender, because if I'm going to take a wild gamble on this, I'm going to say the boys are probably more prone to this kind of behavior and to doing this than girls are. It continues forthright, and so we have our primary point. On one hand, I agree with this. Most of my input on this is somewhat anecdotal. My own childhood, between those sorts of years, is, between sort of 13 and 16, 14 and 16, were very much spent ignoring my fucking schoolwork. Much to my detriment later in fucking life, but ignoring my schoolwork. Because quite frankly, I was one of those kids who just could not be stimulated by a subject he did not find interesting. If I didn't like the subject you were talking about, I didn't want anything to do with it. And these days, given that the educational system is skewed very much in favor of high theoretical learning, there's very little practical learning occurs at that age, especially in sort of Western Europe and in the US. It's easy for kids to just go, I don't fucking want to be here. I so don't want to be here. I'm not going to pay attention to any of this shit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape whilst sitting in class to this fantasy reality of video games that I'm so used to being in when I go home. I think parents play a role. I think that what I'm not seeing from this study, and there's not a lot of detail in this news report, but the situation at home dramatically affects a child's ability to concentrate on sort of educational studies. There's much less focus. If the child comes from a home that is naturally unstable, and I'm gonna say that I did, then the kid's gonna want to escape constantly from an unstable home situation. Not only that, but certain personality types are just more geared towards wanting to engage in that sort of introverted, fantasy-seeking, sort of pastime. I know kids that they play a couple of hours of video games a week, maybe that's it, and then they spend the rest of their time out playing football, playing sports, getting outside, getting fresh air. And similar children from similar homes, due to the sort of structure of their personalities, are much more interested in spending time indoors in front of a screen, being more so involved in that process. The thing about this is video games give kids skills that are not necessarily practical in a heavily academically intense environment, in a theoretically academically intense environment. The one thing video games do help with is reading. See, I remember when I was a kid, I was a mad fan of Final Fantasy. Really great fan of Final Fantasy, but my actual language skills as a child were quite poor. Not so much my speaking, but my reading and writing was actually quite terrible. And I think as time went by, that actually improved dramatically when I discovered JRPGs, when I discovered the Final Fantasy series, and similar sorts of games, which were all, heavily text-based and so on and so forth. Of course, the child's actual preference in video games obviously changes. Not all kids like RPGs, not all kids like shooters, not all kids like racing games. But, again, the subject matter of the video game can dramatically affect the sort of outcome of this as well. I think at the end of the day, the study is too bare. It just sort of says, the article even admits that the research does not establish why this is the case. The research simply seems to find a similar correlation, not causation, that kids who spend a lot of time in front of their video games consoles at a very young age, between those critical ages of 14 to 16, I think that's very important. See, especially for boys, I can't speak for girls, but I can only speak from my own experience at that age, and I distinctly remember not fucking wanting to be involved in the academic process at all, because it was tedious and it was tiresome. My mind went elsewhere. So, it's pretty vague. They've just said, these kids score this way, etc., 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 based on this criteria. I would say that you need to dig deeper into the family situation with that kid, because I think they've done this study in a vacuum. So, on one hand, I agree that that's very possible, that, a child's academic studies may suffer as a result of them constantly being engaged in video games. But you also have to consider the personality archetype of the child, because at around 14 to 16, you begin to get a real sense of the sort of person that a child is going to become. You can get a good measure of a 16-year-old. You can see the same person when they're 26. You can see the same person when they're 36 and 46. That's a real important and crucial time in the resolution of a child's personality. So understanding that may be very important. Again, I can speak for boys in the sense that this intense theoretical learning environment that exists now in high school is not helpful for especially for boys who have a very kinetic sense of reality. Generally speaking, studies have shown that boys tend to be more kinetic. They tend to be more feels. They want to grab shit and they want to pull it apart and play with it. For a lot of boys, theory work just goes out of their fucking minds. Video games provide at least a good, strong kinetic output. You could even argue that where the educational system is failing these students in their desire to have a kinetic experience and a kinetic feedback, video games is filling that role. I wonder if, by the same merit, if Western education had continued to incorporate these sorts of hands-on experiences, this hands-on sort of apprenticeship education, woodworking, metalworking, etc., those sorts of real physical educational processes, I wonder if the grades would be quite so low for people who play an excessive amount of video games. Because keep in mind, the video games have been shown again and again and again to increase the hand-eye coordination of their users. Older people experience quicker mental reflexes when they begin playing video games. Children who play video games as they grow up also tend to also continue to grow as people who are very sort of spatially conscious. You know, they have a good sense of the angles and dimensions of reality that they move around in. So I think this is a failure of the educational system to provide stimulating content to the children who are now suffering as a result of this. It's less to do. I think it weighs less on the children's shoulders and more so on their shoulders. And that's really all I have to say about it. I'm Ross Dunn. Like, comment, and subscribe.